The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, so they can see the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven. Don't even begin to think that I have come to do away with the law and the prophets. I haven't come to do away with them, but to fulfill them. I say to you very seriously that as long as heaven and earth exist, neither the smallest letter nor even the smallest stroke of a pen will be erased from the law until everything there becomes a reality. Therefore, whoever ignores one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called the lowest in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps these commands and teaches people to keep them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. I say to you that unless your righteousness is greater than that of the righteousness of the legal experts and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. There exists an obscure one-act play entitled The Terrible Meek. The setting is Calvary, the place of Jesus' crucifixion. There are three characters: the chief centurion, a soldier under his command, and Mary, the mother of the crucified. It is done entirely in darkness until the very end, when light begins softly to rise. The language used seems forced and deliberately chosen to seem appropriate to the period. But it's probably not appropriate to any period, frankly, because it comes off stilted and odd. All in all, it is a peculiar little play. I admit that I had never heard of it, and I know that it exists because I went online to find it. When you find something like that, it exists, definitely. It exists somewhere in the cloud, I suppose. And it's not copyrighted, as the song apparently that I played last Sunday was. It had to be cut from the recording that was posted online. I found a copy of the script online. So why, you might ask, did I do this? It's because I ran across a line from the play that led me to want to know more about it, to research this thing. In the three-way conversation, a struggle rages in the mind and will of the centurion in charge of the execution. He is confronted with attempting to understand the two kinds of power being played out against each other there. After rationalizing his role in the drama, this is what I do, I kill people, he is forced to conclude that finally the power of Jesus will shake all the empires and kingdoms of this world into dust. Jesus and his followers are, he says, the terrible meek, the fierce, agonizing meek. The issue he struggles with, the question of real strength, is eternal and is contemporary as well. Is power a thing to be seized and wielded, or is it achieved in some other way? Are the strongest those who ruthlessly use their power over people, or those who exercise power with people? And this brings to a focus a central biblical theme: God's power expressed through the humble. This theme is front and center in today's readings. They can lead us to try to understand what the Scriptures mean when they speak of the virtue of humility. This is a difficult reach for most of us. It certainly is for me, who do not seek to be humble or particularly want to come to possess humility. What it does not mean is the cultivation of a subjective low self-esteem, a constant putting down of oneself. It does not mean making humility a joke, as in the sarcastic description of someone who is humble and has a lot to be humble about. It is not a matter of self-valuation at all, but a matter of conduct toward others. The biblical meaning of true humility grows out of the realization that in the final analysis, in the words of an especially piercing collect, we have no power of ourselves to help ourselves. Frankly, I am not at all sure that we really believe that. We live in a world where pulling oneself by one's own bootstraps, now there is a quaint image if I ever ran across one, is such an admired trait, even when it is not true. People claim it, even if they have inherited wealth, which gave them a substantial boost up the bootstrap chain. False modesty is a thin cover for real humility. It can serve to mask the real selfishness which motivates human beings so much of the time. Now, the second sentence that I'm about to read is where I say blank autocorrect. The middle word sort of in that second sentence, I typed ingenuously, and it came out ingeniously, which does not mean anything like what I meant. So read it as I read it. The prophet Isaiah speaks to this issue strongly in today's first lesson. The people ask, perhaps ingenuously, why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice? But God replies to Israel, is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is this not the fast I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? The prophet lived at a time of affluence and worldly power for Israel. Remember, pride goes before a fall. And his message contains a stinging attack on those who exploit the poor, venal judges, corrupt religious leaders, and false prophets. For their faithlessness, the people have earned condemnation and punishment. It is not because of ignorance of God's righteous demands, spelled out in the denunciation of what is actually happening, but it is deliberately not doing what is asked or commanded. We too live in a time of affluence and power, and we do not respond well to a message of humility. What does it say when a judge excuses the egregious actions of an entitled teenager who drove drunk and killed innocent persons as the result not of alcoholic intoxication and utter irresponsibility, but the inevitable result of something the judge called affluenza, which he defined as being basically too rich and too pampered and too above the rest of the world to be responsible, to know right from wrong. The leaders of the nation, from the president to the Senate and beyond, sometimes appear to endorse that message, that if one is privileged enough or wealthy enough or powerful enough, one can do anything, including shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York. Given the present state of affairs, are there or will there be cracks showing in such a structure? Does nuclear overkill capability reassure us, or does it make us a bit uneasy? Have we as a nation learned something of the limitations of power, persuasive or military, from the excursions into Afghanistan or Syria or elsewhere? Will we ever recoil in disgust from the ever-widening boundaries of what is politically acceptable? Are we no longer capable of learning that there may be a better kind of power than that which rests upon domination of people and exploitation of the creation, slowly or rapidly destroying the environment? The kind of power that the Christian faith knows and ought to proclaim was asserted on a cross and in death. This paradox lies at the heart of Christianity. God's folly, Paul taught, is wiser than the intellectual constructions of human beings. God's weakness is more powerful than all of our human attempts at domination. Christ, weak on the cross, has risen to make his followers know themselves as not wise as humans account wisdom, not influential as well-born and pampered. Christ makes his people carriers of a movement which swept around the world and down through the ages. Christian humility is knowing that what we do that is really ultimately worthwhile and consequential is done only by the grace of God. That brings me back to the centurion with which I began. For those who accept that it is by grace alone, when we are told that the meek shall inherit the earth, it is the terrible meek, the fierce, agonizing meek, those of whom the centurion spoke and of whom the Bible speaks.